Okay, welcome everybody to another edition of the Psych Monologues. I'm Dr. Ray Mitsch, your host. I'm glad you could join me. Thanks so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. I am coming to you on Easter evening, so I've got a load of stuff to talk about. And so you're listening to, if you're new, and I do this every time just so people that I have never heard us before can know a little bit of what we're trying to do. But you're listening to the Psych Monologues, and it's a podcast that explores this intersection between faith, psychology, and spiritual formation. Those are three topics that people oftentimes don't think much about. Obviously, people don't think a lot about psychology, other than whether they like it or not, and whether it is relevant or not. And so that runs in the background, so we don't think much about it. Obviously, faith, perhaps, we spend some time looking at, but not nearly enough, I would say. And then certainly our spiritual formation. How do we participate in what's going on in our lives and what kinds of things we need to participate in? So thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to listen in. I wanted to make sure you guys knew a little bit of developments, I suppose. 3 years ago, last month, March 2020, when we were all sent home, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but when we were all sent home as a result of the assault of COVID on our country and our world, for that matter, I was confronted with a problem because the students I was talking to, we only had a month and some change left in the semester. And a lot of them were seniors, and they were going into, they're losing out on their graduation and all the celebrations and everything that goes along with it. And they were in the midst of experiencing exactly what I was teaching about at the time, and that was grief and loss. And so I thought, well, maybe this is one way to reach into where they are and continue to teach, but also continue to empathize with what they were experiencing and place it within some kind of context. So that's the fertile soil out of which an organization was born called Stained Glass International. And Stained Glass is part of a larger teaching that I engage in my classes, and certainly I will take some time on the podcast to do at some point. So we started in March 2020, and here we sit April 2023, and I received news from our podcast platform that we had hit a remarkable milestone. I don't know, I have no comparisons, which is probably better that way anyway, comparison points for other podcasts and other things, but we hit the milestone of 10,000 downloads in 3 years, which is, I don't know if it's remarkable, not as significant to me. It really blows me away that we could have about 250 downloads a month in terms of the things that I am taking the time to talk about and trying to focus on and highlight and all the other things that I try to do with this podcast. So it was a remarkable milestone. It was for me. So 10,000 downloads, and now we're climbing into another, I don't know, category. I don't know what else to call it. But it is really a part in a supporting beam, if you will, of SGI, which Stained Glass International's mission is to equip, encourage, and empower the next next generation of Christ followers. And I want to clarify that a little bit. And there's a reason why I use that word in particular rather than Christians. To live authentically in relationship to Jesus, others, and themselves. And the reason I do that is because that word has gotten co-opted in our culture today, so much so that it doesn't carry any positive connotations, really, in some circles, not all, obviously. The interesting thing about that, when you look into the history And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because I'm just getting this rolling up here. But the one thing I'll note is in history, the people who followed Christ never called themselves Christians. The people that watched them called them Christians. So they didn't own that. They said they were followers of the way, and they followers of the path. And they had this idea, a little bit like what we're talking about here, as far as outposts and the journey and all of that. They were clear on that's what it was about. Jesus had marked a path for them to walk in and with him. And so the Christian, or the people in the ancient city of Antioch called them little Christs, which is otherwise known as Christians. And things have changed. Needless to say, things have changed a lot. And so what I want to see SGI seek to accomplish is to develop what I call outposts for the heart and communities for the soul. Someplace that is on that path, but is a place to find safety and sanctuary so that we can take our masks off, we can take our armor off, and we can be known as we are. And as much as we desire that, we are afraid of it. And that's probably tame. I think sometimes we would say, I'm terrified of it, because why? And that is the topic for tonight. So pull up a chair, get comfortable, relax. Hopefully this topic tonight will be one that hits where you're living. And I think it quite honestly has a lot to point to in terms of reckoning with what happened on Easter. Because no time in human history has it ever happened that a deity has paid the price of the people that are worshiping him or her, have paid the price just to have a relationship with them. No time ever in human history. So we have a remarkable point in time that calls people to choose, but there is a key element that always seems to crop up that I think we have to talk about. So I'm going to change up the normal programming and talk about something that it really has been nagging me actually for quite some time, really. For the last week, I have been wrestling this demon off and on, and I talked about this a couple weeks ago. I've been wrestling this dude off and on for all week, and so far it's a draw. I wouldn't say I'm winning, but it's a draw. And it literally crescendoed with my attendance with our Easter service at the church I attend. And I stood there in the worship, tears running down my face. And I wasn't making any effort to hide it by any means at all. But I was moved because not only of what Jesus did on our behalf, but also all the people and all the faces of people, and quite honestly, students who have walked away from the church because they have been duped into thinking to follow people rather than Jesus himself. And that's a bigger topic, I know, that we can get into and probably debate. There's always a debate waiting on that one. There always is a debate. Somebody has always got a contrary opinion, which is fine. But I think sometimes it's a distraction away from what are the core issues. And that's kind of what I want to talk about, is one of those core issues that always comes up as I talk to students, as I talk to young people. And I'm quite honestly, I'm not surprised, but I'm also shocked at the response that I see oftentimes. So this is where I want to start, okay? And that is, I want to make the assertion that there is a new pandemic. And it's not really new. It's an ancient new, but a new pandemic that lurks amongst us. And the question is if you were to describe what the world, what you did, what was culture like when you were informed and when we were informed of this pandemic. Now, let's be clear, okay? It started percolating up to the attention of all the key decision makers sometime in November of 2019. And then it started to crescendo. And if you were paying attention to any of the news outlets, you would have seen that things were starting to happen. And the World Health Organization got involved and people were starting to talk about it. And suddenly it just landed like this huge meteorite. And my question to you is, how would you describe it? Because I think a lot of people, a lot of the people that are listening to me have gone through it, right? And there was one of my groups that I was talking to this week, and I wouldn't call it reminiscing, but we're remembering what it was like to live with masks and never seeing anybody's face or not hearing their voices entirely well. All the things that we attempted to do as a result of this thing that was called a virus, right? So a lot of times people would describe it as, well, everything's shut down. And I can tell you that because I commute to CCU from the Northern Command Post here, I commute every day. And it was a breeze. It was really fun, actually, because there are very few people on the road. And things got shut down. And the interesting thing about it, which I really noticed quickly, is that people became suspicious of other people who had the virus. And so if they didn't wear their mask or whatever other, minutia that we got caught up in during that time, and the debate was raging in not only social media, but in media, but ultimately the world, quote unquote, shut down. We were separated from one another, but we had the semblance of connection through Zoom and through FaceTime and through other outlets like that. And in spite of that, we were still not connected, really. I mean, we called it connected, but I still remember many of the times teaching classes with students on the other side of a screen rather than students sitting in front of me. And I had no facial expressions to respond to or notice at all. And that took a lot out of me. And so I want you to think about that as a context for what I'm going to talk about tonight, because we've been through a pandemic and we've more or less come out of it. There's still echoes of what's going on with that. But I want to make this, so the assertion is a new ancient pandemic has been lurking among us for a long time. And it's been part of the human race for actually quite some time. We just don't pay attention to it anymore because we just assume that it's a natural part of the human story. And it has been, quite honestly, it's been a part of the human story since the beginning of time. Wherever you place it, wherever humans hit the scene, Adam and Eve, or wherever you want to point to it, this has been there. And this quote-unquote virus, if you want to put it that way, has been passed down from generation to generation, whether directly or indirectly, and everybody is infected with it. Essentially, everybody is infected with it. And what happens as a result of it is either it becomes a context of do this is how you survive in the world, this is how you interact with people, this is how you think, this is how you think about yourself, this is how you think about God, everything. Yeah. And it lays the foundation for a way of thinking about the world around us and other people. And it impacts how we think about things, okay? So it's not only do this, but we see other people reacting to it in particular ways, and then we make the conclusion, don't do this, okay? Now, let me give you an example, because in dysfunctional families, which is an area I know something about, you will see things jump generations oftentimes, because you'll have a generation where somebody, let's just use the context of alcoholism. You have somebody who's a raging alcoholic, and the kids grow up in that environment, and they, over time, because they're affected by it, and their parents who they care about are affected by it, and they say to themselves, I'm not going to do that. And they now take this into the next generation, and guess what? They don't. They may be complete teetotalers. The funny thing about it is that in an effort to be the opposite of their parents, emotionally, they are just like them. And so out of that generation, they say, well, at least I won't drink. And their kids are affected emotionally by certain patterns of communication and boundaries and all of these other things. And the kids say, well, I'm not going to do that. And so they make another correction. And so inevitably, what you end up having is this pendulum-like swing between one generation and another. And the funny thing about it is that the extremes are look exactly the same. They look exactly the same, actually. And so this virus, as I'm calling it, is passed from generation to generation. And I'll give you a great example of that. Again, I used the alcoholic family as one example. The other example I'll give you is this is a story I've heard many years ago about a little boy. His dad takes him down to the local parking lot. It's a big parking lot, and there he's learning how to ride his bike. It's an easy place to teach him. And the dad says to his son, now that he's pretty good at it, he said, whatever you do, now look down there, son, whatever you do, don't hit that telephone pole. And the son says, okay, Dad, I'll be sure I won't hit it, I promise. And he gets going, and he keeps his eye on that telephone pole. And he keeps his eye on the telephone pole, and he keeps moving. And before too long, he runs into the telephone pole. But because he has the constant focus on that. Even though he's saying to himself, I've got to avoid it, it's still in his rangefinder. It's still in his focus. And that oftentimes is the very thing that tends to happen when we're talking about this. So the funny thing about this virus that I'm talking about is that we don't live in fear of it like we did in COVID. You know, we were scared of an inch of our lives. There's some parts of it in terms of how it was talked about and the news reports and everything else that made you sound that if you got COVID, you were dead. But with this, we carry on life as if nothing really has happened at all. And as a matter of fact, we actually act as if life has always been this way, which interestingly enough, actually it has when it comes right down to it. Now, I'm not naming it yet for a purpose. There's one last parallel I want to talk about, and that parallel is the movie The Matrix that was released in 1999, which was somewhat prescient now that we're hearing rumors of AI and everything else. But The Matrix, everyone is in it, but doesn't know that they're in it. And this is true of what I'm going to reveal here in a second. This is true of everyone that we know and everyone in the church. Okay? Everyone in the Matrix assumes it's normal. They have no other reference point. They assume that this is how it always has been. This is the world that they're living in. And we live in the world that we're given. We don't really think beyond that. And that same thing is true in regards to what I'm talking about. Everyone in the Matrix hates those who aren't, since they upset the status quo. So people who aren't in the Matrix, who aren't cooperating with this particular way of seeing life and doing life, get hostile with the people that don't, because they're they're upsetting the status quo. And we very much underestimate how much we are committed to the status quo. That is true within us, that is true in our relationships, and that is true in the larger world that we function in. We pay attention to things that change. We don't pay attention to things that stay the same. We get accustomed to them and we quit paying attention to them. And that's exactly why this particular virus, if you will, is so deadly. So while we're not under the control of machines, and I'm looking at my notes, it says, AI, anyone? And we're not to the point of Terminator. We're not to the point of any of that. But we are all addicted to the virus of power and control. That is the virus. And it's a pandemic that has been endemic to the human race since the beginning of time and since the beginning of all relationships. And one of the things that I have been puzzled over is why so many young people have walked away from the church. And it occurs to me that Christians have represented God in such a way that young people don't see any compelling reason to follow Jesus, because the people who do seem bent on controlling everything about their lives. They're not willing to trust them. And so whether this is true or not, whether you believe or agree that that's indeed what is happening, okay? That's certainly what I've been told. But whether you believe that's true or not, one of the basic elements that we have within psychology is perception is reality. Whether you think that's true or not, or whether you think that's valid or not, we can debate over the whole reality thing. But perception is reality. How I see something, the values I place on it, the way I frame it, what it means to me, not the actual reality description piece, but what it means to me, that is what I react to and what I adjust to, and that's what reality is. And so even this is even seen by the way in which you doubt what it is because of your perception of other people's unwillingness to agree with you. And so young people, and again, maybe I can be the voice. I'm an older voice, but maybe I can be the voice for young people that say, the kind of Jesus you're reflecting to me, thanks but no thanks. I'm not really all that interested. And when it comes right down to it, we can debate about reality until the cows come home, which when I wrote that down, I thought, I don't wonder where that phrase comes from. Of course, that's just how my brain works. But we can debate about whether you agree what reality is or not. But in the meantime, we have an entire generation who's being lost because they believe they've found freedom from authority, they have found freedom from nature, and they have found freedom from disappointment. Interestingly enough, one author actually referred to that as the pillars of belief that are part of what he referred to as the I world. Freedom from authority, freedom from nature, and freedom from disappointment. Interesting, right? So we create a world that has no disappointment in it. And the world, watch social media. You don't ever see anybody get on social media and talk about how disappointing a situation or an event or anything like that. And you might make the argument and say, well, it's not really what that's for, right? But there's a subtle pressure to put your highlight reel on in contrast to other people's highlight reels, but you're left living with your real life. And that's where the issue comes up. So what we have is we have passed on a legacy of control and power. And surprise of all surprises, it has seeped into our relationships, in churches, in sermons, in other relationships, as I said, and even into our relationship with God. Because a lot of people reject a relationship with God because they think it is indoctrination and rules and expectations and impossible things to conform to. That's the heart. That's really not the heart of Jesus if you actually look at the Gospels as they were written. So what I want to highlight as we go into this a little farther is the efforts that we put forth in regards to key areas of control. And like I said, the minute I say control, somebody's out there's eyes are glazing over because it's like, yeah, what's new? That's always the case. But how does it show up? And it shows up when you're quaking in your boots, being vulnerable with somebody who you say matters to you, but quite honestly, you don't trust them with what you're about to be vulnerable about because you can't control the conclusions they make or the perceptions they will have, right? And so we live in our little glass houses and everybody's armed with stones and we say, okay, I won't throw mine if you don't throw yours. And as a matter of fact, I won't give you a reason to throw yours because I can make it so that you don't. And either I'll withhold information or I'll sanitize the information I give you so that you have no reason to throw your stone. Okay? So, some areas that we tend to focus our control. The first one is our attempt to control pain. Because generally, this generation is not unique, but we see all pain is bad. All pain is bad. All you have to do is go off to Walgreens and check out the analgesic section. We spend billions and billions of dollars to get rid of pain. So we have made the conclusion that all pain is bad. There is no distinction between different kinds of pain. But I think that if we were able and we had the opportunity in relationship, not through teaching like this, but in relationship, learn how to put pain in context. Now, pain, even that, our tendency is to create a gradient around it. So pain is excruciating, level 8, 9, and 10 pain. When you say pain, right? But we don't think about discomfort, disappointment, disillusionment. Is that pain? Grief? Loss? Is that pain? Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. But we don't put it in that category. So there are different kinds of pain, and the only way we learn this is within the context. Nobody's going to sit us down and say, "All right, let me give you a course on pain." So the first one is pain of growth, and pain is to be expected. Actually, it's an indication of the very growth we say we seek. And if you've done any athletics at all, what's a coach often say? I don't know if they still say it. They used to say it when I was in athletics, and that was no pain, no gain, right? Because gain or pain actually indicated the muscles growing. But we see all pain as bad, therefore we don't take any of the risk of stretching beyond our comfort zones, and therefore we don't grow, quite simply. there is always pain in growth, because changing old habits to new circumstances and new people and new situations and developing a new understanding of how people function and how they relate to us and all that is hard. It is hard. There's no debating that point. And even how the world works and making adjustments to our perspective is hard. And even how God functions is uncomfortable. All you have to do is read the book of Job and how uncomfortable it was to Job. But he had a perspective about pain that often Christ followers have that nobody else has, because we're able to see it as part of growth. But if we see all pain as bad, then we, quite honestly, will shy away from and run away from growth. I said, today, at least here in Colorado, it's probably the warmest Easter in the last 10 years or so. So we sat out on the back porch and chopped it up about a variety of things that were going on in people's lives or whatever. And my youngest grandson was tooling around. He actually had the freedom to do that. The sun was shining. It was all comfortable and so forth. And our backyard has a variety of treasure troves of things to get into, like my wife's garden, or, a bare spot on the lawn, or anywhere else, all sorts of places. And he grabbed something, stuck it in his mouth, which is what, 1-year-olds do. And, he started crying. Why? Because he had dirt in his mouth. It wasn't fatal. He's not going to die. But it was uncomfortable, right? Growing up is uncomfortable. It's painful. But it is part of growing up. It is part of experience. It is part of, from a psych point of view, is part of learning. If we don't tolerate pain, if we don't put it in some kind of context, guess what? Not only will we not grow, we won't learn either. So there's the pain of growth that is part of that. The second one, which is the one that I think we take and apply everywhere, is the pain of damage and destruction. And we've seen such pain that people get to, march beyond, this is uncomfortable, to, I think I want to die, or I am going to die, or I can't do this. And, growing up in a different culture, in a different age, it's hard for us, and I'll say it as my generation, it's hard for us to relate to that because it seems so dramatically catastrophic compared to what they're experiencing. So they talk about, and young people often do, killing themselves or killing others. We've seen too many examples of that. And quite honestly, they have had plenty of pain and damage and destruction fall on them from sexual abuse and sexual promiscuity and physical abuse and neglect, and the intense awareness of the injustice in the world through media and social media. All of that feeds into this. And they're lured into creating a world without pain in it. And to avoid that pain that they have experienced, and quite honestly, understandably, I mean, we do that, in binging a Netflix series or Amazon series or whatever. We distract ourselves, but we never ask, what am I trying to distract myself from? But we get lured into creating a world without pain. And there's lots of good reasons behind it. My job isn't to convince somebody they're not in pain. My job is to validate how difficult it is to live in the world that we're in. So, for me, being of my generation, late boomer, teaching the Gen Zs, they have seen a lot that fuels this kind of approach. They have seen broken relationships. They have seen divorce. They have seen suicide. It's remarkable on that point. It is remarkable how many students I have talked to that have a friend or a classmate or somebody who has committed suicide. And it has impacted them in dramatic sort of ways. Or homicide. We have school shootings. We're not that far away from Nashville. What happened there in terms of school violence? And their expectations have been calibrated against anything but that. And this is the stuff of seeking a utopia. Well, we don't have to go somewhere and create a utopia. All we have to do is sit down with our computer and our Xbox or PS4 and go into another universe that I don't feel anything. The characters do. The characters do, but I don't. And the worst part about it is the numbing effect that has. So, we have the pain of damage and destruction that is, I'm not going to say it's more valid, but it is rooted in real-time reality. The pain of growing is more ambiguous and unclear, and by the time I get to a certain point, I think I should be beyond it, and therefore I'm not going to have any of those conclusions to make. Okay, and there's another one, and that is the pain of being human. And this one is particularly tough because it is a very mundane subject. We all know we're human, right? And that's why in a lot of cases it's overlooked. And no one has clued us in to the discomfort of being human and limited and broken and sinful and so far away from the utopia that we long for. And at least in the Christian world, the utopia we long for, I would say we're even created for, is heaven. And we wouldn't know about it if we didn't read it in the Bible, right? And Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you where there's no more tears and no more pain. And every tear that you have, I will wipe away. And so what comes to be a part of our experience of being human, in being limited, in being unable, in being reminded of our limits, which we hate, is we hate being human. And there's fuel for that even in the Christian faith because of what we believe is the necessary part of the war that goes on within us between our old nature and our new and sin. But that doesn't make us, in God's eyes, because he's redeemed us, it doesn't make us to an object of hate. It makes us an object of love. And so we hate really the most basic parts of who we are. Our emotions, our confusions, our doubts, everything that defines us as human is now hated. And that's another pain, if you will, that we live with in the background all the time. So one of the areas that is a really, really big area when it comes to control is we have modeled for us what to do with the control over pain and how we deal with it and how we live with it. We don't see pain as good in any way, shape, or form. And, the writer Philip Yancey and goodness, what was that guy's name? Paul Brand wrote a book called The Gift of Pain. Now, understand that when it first came out, nobody bought the book because nobody wants to read about pain, right? And the whole idea of a gift of pain is just an oxymoron. So they retitled it The Gift That Nobody Wants. which is true. Because you walk down a street and you're on an uneven sidewalk and you twist your ankle. What happens? You limp. Why? Because the pain says something's wrong and you need to protect it. Right? And so we despise the symptom and we don't even look at the cause in all of that. So control over our pain. Another one is the control over people. And it is far safer to control people than it is to be known. Quite honestly, let's just call it the way it is, right? The danger of being known and at the same time longing to be known, which puts us in an impossible double bind, which prompts us into kind of a bland, mundane, non-meaningful existence, because we don't trust anybody and we don't trust people and ultimately handling what we see. Now, what comes in here is that because of that lack of trust of people, it's safer to control people, how they think, how they behave, the distance they keep or they don't keep. All of it is all about controlling people. Now, most people will say, when I say that, it's like, well, I'm no controller. Well, you may not overtly be, but you think that way. And so control over that. Now, so we're caught in this double bind. I want to be known, but I don't trust anybody. And I'm spending all my time trying to control what they think about me. But I long to be known. But long to be known by whom? Who's trustworthy enough to know you? And even from a Christian worldview, we have a God who knows us, loves us as we are, not as we should be, and we don't trust him either. Why? Because we don't trust ourselves. And the only effort available to us is to control ourselves. The thing I say all the time, and I'll say it, I've resisted saying it all the way through here, is control and trust can't coexist. So if I don't trust, then the only thing left for me is to control. That may not be I'm overbearing and dominant and intimidating and bullying people. No, it doesn't mean that at all. It means how I think. And so I'll withhold information in order to manage how people think about me. And so controlling over people is multifaceted and incredible in depth in terms of this part of the infection of this virus, if you will, of control. And the last one I want to talk about, well, I got a couple more, is control over the past. And one of the contributors to our shame is our past. And even today, as I stood and sat in the Easter service and in the church I go to, we actually had baptism today. And people make the conclusion that I have been so bad and so disgusting that God can't possibly love me enough to invite me back into relationship again. And the only thing I will say is look at the story of the prodigal. Because the prodigal came and the father ran to him. That gives you exactly the picture God has of us when we have wandered so very far away. And it's our past that oftentimes is the very thing that keeps us from the God that wants to accept us as we are, because we don't accept us as we are. See, we have been sold a bill of goods that says our past doesn't define us, but we live as if it does. And of course, there are others of us that just say, all right, just move on. Forget about the past. Let's just move on and have it have no impact on us. The funny thing is that the problem with either moving on or denying our past or spending all of our time being controlled by our past is it still leaks into our emotional water table and our relationships with other people. It still leaks in. And so trying to control the pain of our past is a fool's errand, because I'm affected by, I'm shaped by, I'm even, what do I want to say? I'm even impacted by, it's not really the word I was looking for, by my past. And we think condemning our past allows us to move into the future, but we haven't really gotten rid of it. We're just dragging it along with us. And it will show up. Sooner or later, it'll show up again. And then the last one I want to mention is the control over the future. And this is the one with people that are planners, is that I want certainty. I want to know what the future is going to look like. Therefore, I will take the ambiguity of the present and impose certainty on it so that I finally feel comfortable to move forward. But who am I trusting then? Because ultimately, I'm trusting my ability to plan for it, not the revealing of the future to me by a God who loves me. And so I think we all know I can't control my future, but I act like I do. So whatever I act is what I actually believe. It's not what I say I believe, and that we're split people. We have beliefs, and then we have life. And so the results are ultimately the same. It's always emptiness, confusion, doubt, and uncertainty. It's always the same, because sooner or later, I'm going to bump into things I can't control. And so, what's the alternative, you ask? And there are three different things I want to highlight, and then I'll sign off. There is trust, there is freedom, and there's allowing for our humanity, which oftentimes results in humility. Which, interesting connection, right? So, trust is the antidote to control. It doesn't mean I get the outcomes I desire, but it does mean that I can trust. Now, again, let's be really clear, okay? I'm not going to trust somebody into being trustworthy. Let's be clear. I can trust somebody and they're still going to stab me in the back, which doesn't make them any more trustworthy. I need to take the time to evaluate the character of the person I'm in relationship with. Have they even given me a reason to trust them? Now, I like them. I might want to be in relationship with them, and me offering myself as a sacrifice to accomplish that doesn't result in trustworthy behavior. And so we've learned very quickly that no one is to be trusted. The reality is that's only partially true. There are people that are trustworthy most of the time, but it's not entirely true. And either we say no one's to be trusted or everyone's to be trusted, and both are untrue. And we have to keep that clearly in mind. The only alternative, if I am not going to trust people, as I've already said, is controlling them or trying to counter their efforts to control us. It's one of the two. So while we love to talk about trust, the bottom line is we trust no one, whether we know it or not. And worse yet, we trust God even less. Because he's not controllable. And that's exactly why we don't trust him. I've heard a lot of people say, well, if I trusted God, he'll ask me to go off to China and be a missionary. Is that really what somebody who loves you does? It doesn't really make sense. But it speaks to our fear of what? Losing control. So what about freedom? I mean, one way to think about it, freedom is allowing somebody else to choose wrongly and to allow them to suffer the consequences. And sometimes those consequences are me. Me saying to them, they make a wrong choice in terms of how they relate or what they do or whatever, and me choosing to set limits or to have boundaries or to say, horror of all horrors, ouch, that hurt, and they suffer consequences as a result of what they choose. They can choose wrongly. And I think intellectually we'll assent to that idea, but not practically, because we know what's best for other people. Not only that, we know what's best for us. And so they need to choose the right way, right? But this is the very thing that's driving people out of the church, because we're not willing to let them choose and trust God enough to impact them, to bring them to an understanding of how trustworthy He actually is. So, people don't need our permission. And it doesn't prevent us, really. It doesn't prevent us from informing them of the potential of what could happen. It doesn't stop us from doing that. We don't have to go mute and silent as a result of that. But in the final analysis, it is their decision. And it is not for us to punish them for making the decision that we don't approve of, which we subtly tend to do, right? Our tendency is to, you have all the freedom in the world, but when you make the wrong choice, I'm going to make you pay, whatever that looks like. And then finally, learning to live with ourselves as human. It's called humility. Because humility reminds us that we're human and that we have limitations and flaws and shortcomings, and we make mistakes. All of those things. It is not something we strive for, humility, but it is the outcome of cultivating a clear-headed understanding of me as human. And I stay in such blindness over my shortcomings because I'm afraid of them. I'm afraid that they will drive people away, that I end up being threatened by people that don't still love me, really. I mean, so being humble is not based on shame. Being humble is based on a clear-headed, clear-minded understanding of who I am. And I've taken the time to know who I am. Because if you don't do the self-reflection, you're not going to know it. So there's nothing really to fuel humility, really. Because humility is a byproduct. It's not something I achieve. Being humble is not something I achieve. The question is, what am I cultivating internally that I'm not focused on trying to be humble. I'm trying to focus on knowing myself as I am and accepting myself as I am. Because no change can happen if I reject how I am. No change can happen. So ultimately, God doesn't exist to remove these from us. Call it what you will. He came to redeem our humanity, not to simply just change it. And redemption requires relationship. And so he's committed. And what's remarkable about redemption is taking all those things that we spend our time trying to control and leveraging them for us to actually experience the abundant life that Jesus talks about. But it's going through these things. It's accepting these things. And remember, accepting doesn't mean I'm saying it's okay or I'm condoning it or it's fine. No, that's not acceptance at all. Accepting it is, as the name suggests, is I live in it and with it in such a way that I recognize my limits and I know that I need help, not only from others, but from God himself. And that's part of it. And that's part of it. So we have a choice to make, ultimately, about whether or not we are going to break the hold of this virus called control and power. And it doesn't mean shedding our power. It means embracing what is ours to take. Self-control and self-mastery, if you want to put it that way. It's not trying to impose my power on anyone else. It is about understanding that I have the power to make life, and I have the power to make and choose death. And as Moses said to his people before he was about to die in Deuteronomy, he said, here's the quiz. You have death and you have life. Choose life. That's not going to mean no pain. That's not going to mean that. It is going to mean a redemption of the pain to become the kind of people that God ultimately desires us to become. So that's it for tonight. If you have questions, please DM me on Instagram, and I'll be happy to answer, or I will use it on the podcast. I'd love to have the feedback. You can subscribe and follow the website at drmitch.com. and the changes are coming. I will forewarn you ahead. I don't know what the timeline is for that. I've got something just to have you pray about and consider. We also have on the website, under the CCU link, pull down to setting new boundaries. We have digital devotionals you can subscribe to, which is another form of support for Stained Glass International. You get them every couple of days each week, and it talks about healthy relationships and boundaries in them as well. Of course, you can follow us on social media outlets like Instagram at The Psych Monologues, Facebook, Ray.Mitch, M-I-T-S-C-H, and LinkedIn, Dr. Mitch. For the podcast itself, be sure to follow us. Follow us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. We're available on Spotify, on Stitcher, on most of the outlets that you listen to your podcasts. And finally, this is the one I talk about at the end, and that is, if you're interested in partnering with us, or you know somebody who might be interested in the vision and mission of SGI, three different efforts are afoot, if you will, in SGI. One is building up our Silent Retreat Fund, so that we can scholarship people that can't afford to come. There's that. There's the overall mission of SGI and our efforts to begin to grow and to develop the outpost groups that I mentioned to you earlier. And the last one, which is one I'm going to mention tonight, and then I will install it into an effort within SGI and the donation page, is we need help, because it is not cheap to create a website for SGI. It takes a lot of money. It is more money than we certainly have. And if you prayerfully consider, or you know somebody that would be willing to support us, we need specifically $3,000 to launch the SGI website. And all the resources that will be part of it are registration efforts for the silent retreats, and ultimately building a digital hub that will lead to the creation of these outpost groups in a variety of places. I don't know where God's going to plant them and who is going to anchor them and any of that. It's all blind to me. But we need the money to be able to support our effort to move forward into this vision, and that's the amount of money we need to develop. There will be a drop down in our donation page that has the silent retreats, the SGI mission, and the website creation. And if you know anybody, or if you want to give, anything will help. If you want to give to that fund, please do. If you'd rather send us a physical check, you can do that as well. Just make it out to Stained Glass International. Send it to SGI, P.O. Box 160, Eastlake, Colorado, 80614. And we would be immensely grateful for any support in any of those areas. And all of your gifts are tax deductible, and you will get a receipt for your generous donations on behalf of SGI and what we're trying to create here. So that's a specific need that we have to be able to accomplish what we're trying to do in creating outposts where people can go in the storm that we're surrounded by to work out their faith, to work out their relationship with Jesus, to work out their relationships with each other, and ultimately work out their relationship with themselves and who they are, and embracing the reality of I don't have to control the world around me, but there are a small group of people that I know and I've invested in and I can trust, and they will walk with me into this together with me. And that's really what outpost groups are meant to be. So thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time to listen. I've taken I've overstayed my welcome in terms of what I wanted to talk about tonight, but I think it was really very important in light of Easter. One of the greatest obstacles of submitting their lives to Jesus and what he calls us to do is control. We don't want to give it up because we don't trust him. And I get that. And there are places that we can create for people to talk that through. And they can come and belong before they ever believe. But then it's in the belonging that they find that the belief actually matters. And that's what we're inviting you into. Thanks for joining me. I'm glad you took time out of your busy schedule to spend some time looking at a subject like this. It's not always easy. Next week, I will be here waiting for you. As always, we will have just finished our first retreat of the spring, so I will have plenty to talk about after that. So until then, love you. Later. Bye.